Welcome to Musicians Peer Support, everybody. Today we are welcoming Jon Altham. Jon, I'm giving you a round of applause. Thank you so much for being here for our series, The Artist's Blueprint. Um, today, what are we delving into?
We're going into the next chapter, which is chapter five, the deal blueprint, and basically going over why fair agreements depend on value, control, and time, and effectively how can we negotiate fairly without fear.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. It does tie into last week's video. We talked about ownership, leverage, negotiation, and you had some really great points in that video. So, anybody who's watching the replay, I just encourage you to look back at the last video and just get a refresher, but also all the prior weeks of the series. They're super, super valuable. So just encouraging everybody who's watching the replays to go back and watch the first few chapters. But Jon, I think we can dig in right away, right?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay.
As usual, it's a succinct chapter, and then I've also got the workbook at the end, and there's a diagram that we can dive into as well, which will hopefully kind of wrap up and summarize the chapter really nicely. A quick note, those that have got a version of the book so far, thank you. Um, Worth noting, I found it really, really helpful. I thought I would share this when I've read books in the past. I would normally typically do have two versions of it. So have one and class it as maybe name it as master, and then a second one as annotated. So just duplicate it on your end, and then you've got a version that you can always go back to as the original version without any of your annotations. Because my gut feeling with this is that as you evolve through your career and you reassess or maybe re-reference this in a year's time, it would be good to have a fresh version again that then you can re-annotate each year. And it's quite nice then to look back on it and see where your progress has gone from year to year as you compare the versions of the book for the first foundations. So I just thought I'd share that in terms of how I learnt and applied books in the past.
Yeah, and Jon, I would imagine that also the workbooks um, over
Yeah,
time would also evolve just depending on where
exactly.
we are in our careers.
Yeah.
So that's something that we can consider is, maybe every year, every couple years, we reassess with those workbooks.
Yeah, and it's quite nice because when we get into the latter chapters where we talk about the well how we organize our career in different courses and stuff, that's when we can really think about okay when which workbooks go into which quarter, so you don't have to all do it at once. So yeah, we can
Excellent.
discuss that when we get there too.
Excellent. Okay, great.
Okay,
So let's dig in.
green. Hopefully that's working. All right. All right then. Chapter 5, the deal blueprint. Why fair agreements depend on value control and time. So, understanding the deal. A deal is not just a document, it is a mirror. It reflects what each side values and what each side fears and how each side defines fairness. Too often, artists see deals as transactions to escape scarcity rather than framework to build stability. They look for short-term security and trade long-term control. They assume that the other side knows best, and in doing so, they silence their own judgment. Deal is not a rescue, it is a relationship. It should protect both the art and the artist. When you approach negotiation with structure and self-respect, you stop being reactive, you start being strategic. So, the three dimensions of a deal. Every deal has three dimensions. These are value, control, and time. Understanding how they interact allows you to see beyond the surface. Firstly, the value. What are you actually receiving or giving? This includes money, resources, access, and exposure. Value must always be measurable or clearly defined. And if it is vague, it will not hold under pressure. Secondly, control. Who decides what happens to the work? This covers ownership, approval rights, creative direction, and distribution. True controls means knowing who can act without your consent. Number three, time. How long does the deal last, and what happens when it ends? Many creators lose not because of the money, but because they forget to define duration and reversion. A balanced deal manages all three. If one is too heavy, the structure eventually breaks. And here's a little diagram which goes through this really quite nicely, which we'll loop back around to at the end, the three corners of the triangle, and then ask yourself, what is the purpose, exchange, risk, and exit in each of those deals? And a deal is a relationship, not a rescue. That is the key takeaway. So, the deal flow framework. The best negotiators do not start with numbers, they start with clarity. Use this simple framework before every major agreement. Find the purpose. What outcome am I seeking? Map the exchange. What do I give and what do I receive? Identify the risks. What could limit my control or income? And then clarify exit. What happens if this partnership ends? And finally, align your values. Does this deal match the career I'm building? If any of these answers feel unclear, pause. Clarity for commitment. The goal is not to win every negotiation, it is to not lose yourself in one. The anatomy of the creative contract. Every contract, no matter how complex, answers three core questions. Who owns what? Who decides what happens? And who gets paid and when? The rest is detail. Do not be intimidated by length or legal language. Once you understand these three foundations, you can read any contract with confidence. And in doing so, always look for the following. Ownership clauses. Do you retain master and publishing rights? And territory. How long and where does the agreement apply? Reversion conditions. When and how can rights return to you? Payment structure. Are royalties transparent and traceable? And finally, approval rights. Who has creative and commercial control? Any of these are missing or unclear, the contract is not ready to sign. Equity, fees, and fairness. Money in the creative industries moves through three primary forms. These are fees, royalties, and equity. So what are fees? These are one-time payments for a service. Royalties, on the other hand, are recurring income based on usage or performance. And finally, equity, the ownership in the underlying work or entity. Many artists focus on fees because they're immediate, but fees end when the work does. In comparison, royalties and equity build the foundation of long-term wealth. And if you are trading equity or royalties, make sure it is intentional. A good rule is never give equity for exposure and never sell rights you do not understand. Fairness does not always mean equal percentages. It simply means equal respect. Calm negotiator. The calmest person in the room usually has the most leverage. They're not silent from fear, but from clarity. They understand that pressure is often a tactic. You do not have to mirror urgency. You can slow the pace, you can ask for time, and you can seek for counsel. Pausing is not a weakness, it is discipline. When you negotiate from calm, you see what others miss. It allows you to read tone, timing, and motive. You recognize when an offer serves both sides and when it only serves one. Professionalism and stillness or currencies. No deal will ever be perfect. Compromise is part of collaboration, but not all compromise is equal. There is a difference between strategic compromise versus structural surrender. Strategic compromise is temporary. You trade something small for something that helps your long-term goals. Structural surrender, when you give something away, something that is essential, like ownership or control, short-term comfort. When you know what is non-negotiable, you can compromise with confidence. Building your long-term partners. The best deals are not one-time wins, they're long-term alignments. You're not looking for buyers, you're looking for builders and partners who seek partners who respect your ownership, operate transparently, add structure, not confusion, and thinking years, not moments. These are the people that will help grow your ecosystem rather than drain it. Your goal is not to sign the most deals, the right ones. Protecting yourself when things change. Every artist will face contracts end or partnership. When that happens, calm planning protects you. Always include reversion clauses, audit rights, and clear termination terms. Keep copies of all correspondence and statements. When disputes arise, respond through process, not emotion. The person who remains calm controls the timeline. Remember, professionalism is not compliance, it is composure. A legacy principle. Best deals are not just profitable, they're repeatable. Every time you sign an agreement, you're setting a precedent for the next one. Operate with the same consistency you want others to remember you by. You're not just protecting today's income, you're designing tomorrow's reputation. When you negotiate with integrity, you build a legacy others want to align with. Key takeaways. Deal is a relationship, not a rescue. Balance value, control, and time. Seek clarity or commitment, and compromise with purpose, never from pressure. The calm negotiator holds the real power and build partnerships that grow with you. This blueprint doesn't promise perfect deals. It teaches you how to build fair ones and how to protect what matters most in every conversation. Your goal is not to win against others, it's to win with yourself by leaving each negotiation with your principles intact and your peace unshaken. I'm going to leave it there.
Yeah, wow. I love how succinct and short it is, but really substantial and just a dream come true. Like I'm sorry I keep saying this, but like I was praying for this, John. Like I really was. I was praying for this, and like when you're reading it, I'm like, yes, thank you so much. Just like I usually do, just some of the things that were just like, wow, I just need to write that down, ingrain it in my brain. I'm gonna get, I gotta get back to the book, read it again. That fair agreements are made up of value, control, and time. And like the
Mm,
whole thing to me is like how we measure things and how we're
mm,
quantifying and qualifying things in this in like the music industry. Um, um, Strategizing um, versus being reactive, um, and clarity before commitment.
mm,
Um, and just like on that clarity note, I mean, there was something else on the note of clarity, purpose versus pressure, I think is really related to that also. Um, but also seeking builders, not buyers. That's at
mm,
all levels. Like I see that at all levels. The indie artist who has a song that needs a placement. The um, filmmaker that needs an investor. I mean, like, there's a lot of situations where you're looking for builders, not buyers. Um, and I mean, this is definitely a philosophy. Like, not everybody has to agree with this philosophy. I mean, this is very empowering for an artist. So, some one might not want the artist to be empowered. I don't know.
Mhm.
But if it resonates, I mean, to me, this is like really striking exactly what I'm feeling in my gut in terms of values and everything. So, um, I feel like people who can relate to this and it means something to them. Um, it Yeah, again, like I was saying last week, like it will take a while to really internalize these things and kind of have it play out in your own lives and in your own personal experiences, case to case. But that professionalism isn't about compliance, but composure. And especially because I think, I don't know, just in my own experience, being exposed to artists, working with artists, we do feel very vulnerable and very like underhanded. And and you know a lot of times we talk about just maintaining a level of professionalism no matter what happens. If you can, if that's like something that you can kind of hold on to. And when you say it's not about compliance, it's not about just doing what the person says or just being obedient or saying yes to everything. But you say it's composure, and that goes with that clarity and that purpose versus pressure, right? So like all of these things go together. They're nice sound bites, and it sounds really good and catchy, but it is definitely like a mindset, right, John, that you go into these meetings or you go into some kind of negotiation and you're not like, oh my God, I have this thing, this offer, and what do I do? And how much do I, um, that matters. And that ultimately matters with your bottom line, with the money in your pocket, right?
Yeah, exactly. And when you get into those contracts, there's just the three core questions to make things super, super easy. And that's, as we mentioned, who owns what, who decides what happens, and then who gets paid and when. If you know those three, that's the most important parts of the contract. That as it we kind of mentioned, the rest is the detail, and then it allows you to deep dive further and ask more specific questions. But ultimately, if those three specific questions don't align with what your non-negotiables are, then the deal's pointless. It's almost a waste of time looking at your term and reversion clauses and your territory and all of that if the first three aren't even answered. And so I kind of see this as the ability to kind of like hyper focus, and then after that you kind of like both expand and narrow down if you wish, um, and kind of training the brain in that way of being able to be super expansive, but also to be super narrow and focused is a really, really valuable tool. And I hope that this kind of helps with. Well, it's interesting, about this urgency aspect of things. Um, we talk about deals. The deals means anything, right? And as the current theme throughout all of this is that everything is very, very layered in this. And so a deal to someone could mean a record label deal, or it could mean a legal battle that they're currently having, and the deal is either a settlement or something else that's going on in the background. Right? And again, it's then bringing you back to your center, because if we think from a legal perspective and how litigators tend to work, is that urgency is huge. It's a big advantage for them because actually your clarity starts to go down because you're in this kind of spinning circle of like chase, 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 chase. Reality is you're not actually obligated, and obviously check this relative to your jurisdiction, but I'm kind of just speaking to myself and from my own experience. You're not actually obligated to reply to them if straight away if you don't wish. And actually, therefore, having a time delay is massively advantageous because you can just put the brakes on and be like, do I actually need to reply? No. Or if I do, maybe I do that in a week's time, 2 weeks' time, whenever. Give myself to really review it. If it's that serious, let's really review it in detail and make sure we're taking that time, but also taking the time within that, have your clarity, step away, reflect, go for a walk, have a few days to sit on it, and then go back if you wish. Um, and therefore, then you're able to make decisions that align with you, and more often than not, be able to spot very, very obvious things that unfortunately would have been missed if you had replied straight away. And particularly, of course, in a legal context, you've got to be very careful, not only what you reply, but when. it's really, really important.
Right. And obviously, full disclosure, neither of us are lawyers or
Correct.
attorneys. I myself have lited a civil lawsuit on my own behalf. Um, and so what you're saying hits on a very, very personal level to me, where
Mm.
I did not have clarity because of my mental state in the beginning. Um, and as my mental health slowly got better, um, I could see what the deadlines were and verify with the jurisdiction, with the court that the case was in. Again, everybody verifying, consult with your entertainment attorneys, do your due diligence. But that the sense of urgency or false sense of urgency um, is powerful leverage sometimes and can be overlooked in a state of vulnerability where one
Yeah.
lacks clarity. And I've just experienced that on a very, very personal and deep emotional level. So when it comes to business and our artist careers, it does literally mean money in our pockets. And so I really appreciate you explaining that and also just talking about it in that way that in one way it's very focused on certain things, but that allows you to have the freedom to expand and think widely about it because you're zoned in on those principles. You had some really cool graphics in this as well. Can we
Yeah.
go over that a little bit, John, and just talk about, although the three questions that you said about just having that as a foundation into any deal, can you just reiterate that again for people who, like me, I like to learn with repetition? And just very briefly what that is, and then maybe we can tie that into the graphic that we have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
The three points are who owns what, who decides what happens, and who gets paid and when. Also, the other good thing with this, and of course, as you get into the details with any contracts, it's also really important to seek appropriate counsel. But also bear in mind, and I speak to the artist who may not be able to afford a lawyer off the bat, and therefore wants to make this the most efficient thing possible, right? And of course, you might be able to go through your unions and whatever to get more suitable advice. In the UK, we have the Musicians Union, and vice versa, the various unions in the States as well. So that might be a nice way to kind of lower those costs initially. But the point being of those three questions is. Um, it will you don't the point being is you don't necessarily have to get into the legal complexities in a deal where it gets very, very expensive if you understand those three questions and you're able to just simply look at a contract on those basis, because at that point you will know whether it aligns with you or not. And if it doesn't align with you, you don't necessarily need a lawyer to tell you that. It's just your foundational principles of like, okay, who owns what? Oh, they do. Well, that doesn't align with me. Now, if it's very, very stark and you turn around and say, look, these are my non-negotiables. My non-negotiables are that actually I need to retain my writer's share. And if they turn around and say, look, that's off the table, well, you know where it stands, and you don't have to spend as so much going into all this deep dive of approval rights, payment structure, and all of that, because it's a waste of time by that point. And you've already found out what you need to know and what you don't. So um, yeah, the point being is, of course, this is absolutely not legal advice whatsoever. Make that absolutely clear. It's absolutely educational. But those three questions do make a fundamental difference in your early stages in terms of when you're weighing up costs as well, because that's a really important thing to consider as yourself as an artist. Um, so diving into the deal blueprint, let's at the screen and zoom in a little bit more. There we go. So, um, a nice little pyramid, triangle. We've got value at the top, money resources. I'm in our bottom right, and then our left, which is control. And then ask yourself, as part of that deal, what's the purpose of it? What's the exchange? What am I giving up? What am I getting in exchange for this? What's the risk? What does that mean? What's the risk from a reputational standpoint? What is it from a capital standpoint? And what is it maybe from a structural standpoint as well? That's quite important because if it feels very, very rushed and you can't fit it within necessarily your framework that you've built today, and it starts to kind of skew things off, and you're not quite ready for it, that might be something that you need to kind of reassess. It doesn't mean that the deal can't necessarily go ahead, but it means that, okay, my resources now need to expand. Maybe I need a certain person on my team or a manager or whatever it is that's specifically focused in this next phase of and chapter of my career. Then maybe that's what you need. But the point being is that it's this ask yourself bit is the reflection point of just clarifying what's actually required in further detail. And finally, what is the exit? Um, does that mean reversion rights? Does that mean the exit plan in terms of your estate later down the line? How are things being leveraged? But equally, how do I even get out of the deal if I don't want the deal? If we turn out in 2 years' time, we've got audit rights, we find out that they're not um, necessarily as transparent as we wanted it to be, or the deal terms are a little bit no longer balanced and it's no longer a fair exchange. What can we do to get out of that deal? And that's really, really important. The point being, and the reason why I've summarized this as a deal as a relationship and not a rescue, is because quite often when this record label deal, I will use that as an example because there's so many instances where it has gone quote unquote wrong. Um, it seemed just that rescue for the artist to have their lucky break. And a lucky break is a rescue by narrative. It's not the fact that it's a sort of relationship. It's the fact that, okay, I was hoping I'd get here. So, the two things that we mentioned before in terms of the survival cycle, versus this kind of absolute wheel of struggle that we keep going round. Um, so that's where it's really, really important, where we're basically moving ourselves away from that rescue, saying, actually, we don't need this. This is about having a relationship that's going to go on for years to come. How can we make this the most fair exchange for both parties so both parties win? And that's what all of this is about. Mm. I purposely, at the top of value, didn't put anything to do with yourself um, and your own internal reflection. That was a purposeful thing. Um, the reality is value does include your own, self values, your self foundations, your principles. The reason I didn't, because as you read through it in the book, by the time you get to that and you see it, it grates. And you're like, hang on, my value is me too, right? And that's the whole point of it. So yeah, just to point in there that actually that the value can also mean yourself.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. A lot to think about. Um, again, because we're looking at it in context of our own experience. Um,
Mm,
I'm wondering if anybody in the room has questions. John, you're open to questions as always. Probably a good time to mention the website artistsblueprint.com also, where you have resources and the book available for purchase. But thank you for, yeah, the graphics are great because they're simple enough. They're just foundational. Um, and so, yeah, we get to kind of focus in
yeah.
um, on what it real or basically break it down
Mm,
as to what is going on in everybody's situation on a case-to-case basis.
yeah,
Um, yeah.
exactly. We can go through a few mock deals if you wish. Do you have one that comes to mind, or would you like me to do
I mean,
one?
something that usually comes around is like, yeah, song placement is, I have a song and they want to place it somewhere and a lot of the deals that artists that I work with are getting, well, first is a representation deal where they want to put it in their library and pitch it to music supervisors themselves. So a little bit of a middleman there. Um, and they're asking for a certain percentage. I think we talked about that before, usually 60/40.
Mhm.
Um, and also, even before that, um, collaborators, let's say you have three people on a song, um, and they're splitting up their deal. And then, okay, how do they now move forward because it's already split between these many people?
Hmm.
So now artists are kind of having to think, well, do I want to collaborate with people? Because, now like numbers are starting to go down in my mind. So a lot of like getting into the weeds of what I am exposed to or have been exposed to in the past few years, that comes across my desk more often than I would like for it, honestly. Um, and then maybe also, I mean, I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but also, in terms of like, let's say, we've established a name for ourselves for whatever reason we feel like we do have some kind of leverage. We're, working maybe directly with a client, um, and we just don't know if we're asking too much. Like, okay, we feel like we have this leverage. Maybe we're working with a network or a big production company, or somebody who in our minds is big and powerful, and they're looking at some kind of like sync fee slash back end, again in the getting placements and stuff. Um, so those are kind of examples that I would say might be helpful to our community, but also just open to anybody in the room if you guys want to type something in the chat or any kind of specific situation that would be helpful to you. But what do you think of all those things that I just said, John?
Sure. All right, let's go through it. Let's focus on the song placement. We'll do the triangle, and then we'll move into the other bits afterwards. You mentioned the 60/40. Just to reiterate from the last chapter that aligns with the revenue share. Um, Obviously, without going into the full nuances of the deal, but that's most likely where that is. In terms of what we discussed from last time.
Right.
Yeah.
And also just, these are kind of like general examples. We're making kind of hypothetical situations. So obviously it's case to case, but maybe just as a learning experience, we can talk about them as hypotheticals. So, um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So let's go through a song placement, like a sync placement. We'll go right from the top. Um, I write a lot in symbols instead of or numbers instead of actually writing words. So I just put a triangle on the page, and then at the top, I just put like a pound sign, which is normally the value, the money involved, and then resources was stems, and then underneath query like alignment, which is self. Right. So, let's do an example. So, they're offering you 10K. You have all the stems available to you, which is great. And it does align with your foundational principles so far. Fantastic. And providing that, 10K is reasonable enough for you, then okay, well, actually, that first part of the triangle is really, really nicely aligned. Yeah. Um, then we get into the right in terms of time. We're looking at duration, reversion rights. I'm going to do a favorable deal here, and then we're going to go into a non-favorable one. But the term here, um, it could be basically we're going to have an exclusivity period for 2 years. And I'll come on to why in a second. Um, and the reversion is non-applicable in this case because there's no need to revert your rights, and the reason being is because we're going to move into control in a second. Okay. Um, and then we're going to go into the left side, which is control in terms of rights and decisions. In terms of the percentage, you mentioned a 60/40 there in terms of rev share. We're going to presume it actually in this example that you own all the rights to your music and therefore you're the sole owner, albeit the difference is that there is a 60/40 revenue share on what's actually coming through in terms of inflow of capital. Okay. So actually, in terms of percentage ownership, there's no change at all, and you keep control of all those rights. And on top of that, if we go into decisions, what does decisions mean? Let's just go with approval rights. So approval rights are really, really important. They're going to allow you and grant you approval rights in this example. Now, let's go into this in a little bit more detail in terms of the song placement. Let's specifically tie it into film, and let's upgrade the deal a little bit further because we need a little bit more context. So within that, why do we want approval rights? Well, the reason being is because you are going to grant them a license ultimately to the film company. Now, I know we're blending the revenue share, but that's to the sync placement agent, not to the end user here. So there's two different deals going on. But in terms of the end user, which is the film company, they'll be granted a license to use that track specifically for the reason that it's been exploited for. And they will have to have approval rights if it is not. um, if it is used outside of those specific terms, and that basically requires a completely different contract. Um, the point is that, in this deal that we're creating, it is for the main title. But who's to say, for example, if you didn't have approval rights, could they turn around and say, look, we're also going to use this in terms of like a marketing campaign, and that could be aligned with something that is completely not what you're aligned to. Um, Now, ultimately, as we said before in the previous chapter, when it comes to licensing, actually, it's the party on the receiving end of that actually has the lowest kind of leverage and control in that kind of scenario. And the reason being is because ultimately you can restrict the licensing terms down to whatever you wish. So in this example of a sync placement that's going as to main title track, you might say, okay, well, it's only to be used for that. I will accept it for 2 years on an exclusivity basis. And the reason it being is because it's the identifying track for your series. And therefore, they probably won't want you syncing that into another film as a competitor within a 2-year window. So, whilst we don't always want exclusivity in a deal like this, you could probably say, actually, that's probably a fair exchange in the grand scheme of things. Um, Now, looking at all of this so far, actually, it's a pretty fair deal. At the end of the day, what have we got? We've got a payment which aligns with what we want. There may be wiggle room to increase it if it's a main title, but let's just say we agree with it for now. You've got all the stems and resources available, so you can deliver quickly. It aligns in terms of your values. Fantastic. So the value is a big tick. And then, yes, it's exclusive for 2 years, but there's a reasoning for it, and it aligns with where your head's at currently. We don't need to think about reversion necessarily here because you already own it anyway, and this is a licensing arrangement. And then, from a controls perspective, you own all the rights with this deal. You then conclude by the end of it, you ask yourself, well, what's the purpose of it? Well, the purpose is that we want this track synced into film. Cool. Is it going to hit that purpose? Yes. Good. And not only aside from that, is it aligned in terms of where we want to go? Yes. And our career. Fantastic. Is it a fair exchange? And what is the exchange? Well, the exchange is the song for something else, which in this case is the deal as a whole, not just the money that you receive. And that's why there's three specific parts of this triangle. What is the risk? Well, to be honest, the biggest risk here is that if um, the film, maybe the film flops, or if the song or asset you provide them with is exploited outside of the deal terms that you provide them with, right? That could be a fair risk. Um, could it also be the fact that they won't be able to pay you the whole 10K, right? So this could be all the things that you're thinking of, and then you put safeguards in place. So you want all the money delivered up front before you actually transfer the song to them, and you restrict the license and set terms accordingly. As a result, the exit, what does that mean? And what is the exit in this scenario? Well, it's pretty clear, to be honest with you. And there is no material risk for you really because you actually own own the rights here. So in terms of an exit, if something was to happen and you hold the license, you could, in theory, revoke the license if you wish. A little bit difficult in film for reasons that I won't get into right now. But they don't really like you doing it because, say, for example, if it had already been released, it's very, very difficult to recall mass-produced released films. Worse so when it was Blu-rays, DVDs, when it's already in there. You can't actually pull that back at scale. It's just too difficult. So just be aware of that. So, overall, all of those things considered, is this a balanced deal and is it a fair exchange? Yeah, it's pretty solid, and we're going to go ahead with the deal. Now, in a different scenario, what we're going to do here is that we're going to change the time and the duration to basically for perpetuity. Um, and what we're also going to do is we don't have all the stems available to us. So they want the instrumental version. You only have the original record, which is both vocals and backing track. Okay. Now, is this a balanced deal? Is it a fair exchange? No, at this point. And the reason being is because it's not a fair exchange or balanced deal for both sides. The reason being is because it might not align with you on the bottom right in terms of it being gone for perpetuity. So therefore, it's not balanced. And then secondly, from a STEM's perspective, you don't actually have the resources available to them that they want, and therefore it's not fair to them. So what do we do in that scenario? That's where the negotiation starts. So the whole point is that technically, in that last example, the deal is actually falling apart. It's not a formed deal yet because all parts of the triangle are not together in order to make that fair exchange happen. Um, so there's a bit of an example there in terms of how that can change, and the point being is that it happens on both sides of it. Um, the negotiating parties. I'm going to pause there before I go into your other questions. I've actually written them down. Is there anything you wanted to clarify what I mentioned so far?
That was a really great way to, um, it's kind of like it's compartmentalizing um, the various things to consider in any given deal,
Yeah,
so that that assessment is a little bit more accurate, and rational,
yeah,
and then therefore giving you leverage because that's the clarity bit and the calm.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I'm quite a visual person, so being able to map it like that is very easy for me, and I can do it in the side of a contract or something like that. I can put a triangle, I can put the numbers and whatever, and I can roughly then weigh it up in terms of, okay, is this balanced? Is it not? And then it gives me points where I can ask questions, or maybe I want to dive into the contract specifically in that area to understand it a little bit more, right? But if we take moving out of sync, if we put this into like a standard record label deal, the point is the same. So with the value, the money is, most likely the advance. The resources is not only what you can provide, including the time that you've got available to you and whether it aligns with you, that self aspect of it, but it is also the resources of the label, in that example too. What is their marketing department like? What's their distribution channels like? Is it just the fact that they're just like, I'll call it like a DSP bolt-on service, right? So basically they just ship direct. Well, you know, that isn't really maybe that helpful for you um, if you can maybe do it independently. That's what you've kind of got to weigh up is really, is it that much of a difference?
Yeah, if they have
Um,
an entire artist development department that's going to help you
yeah.
with getting all those things that goes into that value bit.
Correct. Yep. Exactly. And then at the bottom right, again, your duration and reversion rights. This is where the reversion rights are really important at that point. So the time is both in terms of the duration of the contract, um, and also the duration of the rights as well, because they're two different timelines usually. So, for example, you might be signed to on a record label deal for maybe 3 albums or a couple of albums or a number of years, but in reality, your rights might be assigned for perpetuity or whatever that is if there isn't a reversion in place. So bear that in mind. And then on the control side of things, again, looking at the rights, who owns what? If they control and own that, are you happy with that? And what does that mean? What does it mean for your asset base? And can you claw anything back? Um, that is both on when we're talking about the record label deal on the performance side, the record, if you can, normally it's an 80-20 split. Um, Sometimes you can, get more, but if you can increase, they may own the master, and if you're happy with that, fine. But can you try and own more of a percentage within that split by maybe reducing the advance that you're getting? That might be a nice little balance because then overall, your asset balance sheet that we talked about prior goes up in value over time. Okay. And then the decisions there as well around control. Again, approval rights. I keep going on about approval rights, but they're so, so important. It gives you more leverage than you realize and options to say no. The reason being is if that song is then synced into a film, which we just talked about, but the record label's like, yes, we want to do it, and we're going to do it for X amount of, dollars, pounds, whatever. If you have approval rights, you could say, well, actually, no, we can't do that because that film does not align with my values. Maybe it's too political, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. But like whatever that motive is at the bottom of it that doesn't align with you, you can stop it from happening. Really, really important. Um, so in a record label deal, that's how that kind of comes together in terms of high level. And then again, you kind of weigh up, is it balanced? And is there a fair exchange as a result of that? If there isn't, why? How can we make it better? It's a reflection.
Yeah, wow. That's really cool. A lot of really great information. I wonder if, because we're good on time, if you don't mind, I wonder if, because we're talking about really detailed music business deals, um,
Mm.
but I feel like this system can also apply to things like, um, let's say what you're doing for what the speakers do for MPS, like what you're doing for MPS, like I don't pay my speakers, they come in, we, exchange information, we talk to each other, we cultivate relationships. There's a lot of like things to think about here in terms of value and time. Like, okay, we have Anthony Bassett doing free mix workshops, we have Tyler Larson doing free piano workshops, and so why would they be doing this? What are they getting in exchange? Why do I want them to do it? Like all those kind of aspects of that, even if literal dollars in this case, it's all pretty much on a volunteer basis. But you can use this to kind of decide what is fair for both parties. And that's what I
Yeah,
like about that. It does, like you said, it goes both ways for both parties. It's not just designed for the artist to have more leverage than whoever's giving them the deal or vice versa. It's making sure that whoever's asking, again, if you don't have the stems, that's not good for theirs. That's not fair to them either. So it's not just the one side. You want to make it fair for both sides because then that goes into reputation and building your future and all that stuff.
exactly, exactly. And yeah, someone provides something for free. There's a lot of resource exchange, and it aligns with both parties. That's a tick. Good. From a time perspective, you weigh that up. It's not just, okay, I want to do X and this is the schedule. It's no, like, let's collaborate together. Let's understand schedules and see what works and aligns with both of us so that we can allow it to happen. Um, and also, how long do we want this to go on for? Is it aligned? Yes or no? So, again, that's another way of how we can make those sessions align and be balanced as a result. And then on the control side of things, from rights, right? If you're providing a lot of things for free, and then it turns out, well, you don't own the rights to what you're doing, or those rights get transferred and you lose them, well, that's actually a massive loss on your balance sheet, and that wouldn't be the right decision to do. Control in terms of decisions, in terms of, publishing it externally and all of this, that all comes into the balance kind of deal and the fair exchange of what goes on here. And then ultimately, then you ask yourself at the end of it, as it says, what's the purpose of it? Well, to provide value to a community that wants to basically uplift each other and propel themselves forward in the music industry. Perfect. Does it
Hmm.
align? Yes. And then if it doesn't work, what's our exit plan?
Right.
You
And
know,
and
and
yeah,
yeah,
beautiful. Beautifully said. Thank you so much for that. And like forgive me for going even deeper than that and saying you can do this with like I'm just looking at it in my own life of like planning with myself. Like is this a good endeavor for me? It's like if I'm making a deal with myself, I think maybe this is what you're hinting about where we're going to get to at the end of the book where you just like you really value yourself more than you did when you started the book. So no spoilers. But it's like you're kind of like if you were to do a deal with yourself in terms of something, let's say, okay, I want to pursue this, maybe I want to get into this library, or I want to try to get a job at that particular studio. You can kind of like it's almost like a pros and cons list, but it's not what's the word? It's not so much about duality but it's a bit more comprehensive than that. But it's somewhat like a pros and cons list that can be applied to even just like personal things for yourself, right?
100%. 100%. Yeah. Um, yeah, and this is a really nice example of how this can be applied. Obviously, we went into more nuanced stuff from, a bit of think stuff there, but record label deals, but equally in terms of personal life as well. Yeah, yeah, it
Excellent.
aligns.
Really great. Okay. Anything else on this, or any other follow-ups? And I know, yep, thank you so much for being here, everybody in the chat. Really appreciate you. Also, John, you said that you are fielding questions on X on your Twitter account, right?
Yes, yes, more than
Okay,
happy to do that.
okay, wonderful.
And dive into your other questions if you wish.
Yes, yes, thank you so much. And just encouraging everybody in the room, if you do have follow-up questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat. Um, And then also people watching the replay, yeah, please feel free to ask questions. My email is mps@musicianspeersupport.com if you have any questions about what we do or this workshop or anything like that. And we will also put John's information in the comments, so please make sure you look at that. It's artistsblueprint.com. But yeah, definitely, John, we'd love to hear what you think about those other examples.
Sure. So, um, just going back onto the sync thing with the 60/40, you mentioned when you're collaborating, sometimes you might have multiple owners or collaborators within that. Um, I think it's a really and as a result, is it worth collaborating as a result of that? Because the revenue can go down. I think it's a fair question. What I would mention with that is that um, I think this is a thing in terms of weighing it up for you, whether that initial reduction on revenue there is beneficial if ultimately you're able to release more, which increases the chances that you might get synced in the future because your asset base increases. So yeah, if you're able to split the workload over three people, but you maybe can do 20 tracks versus you can only do one, that might make a difference in terms of the asset base overall, in terms of the amount of revenue that comes in, over a couple of years. So um, that's one thing to bear in mind. The other thing as well, if you are having, this is specifically related to sync here, um, but if you do have multiple people on it, at least make it so that it's easy to clear quickly. Because the reality is, as I mentioned before, particularly within film, a lot of the time you're always under pressure in order to get that track synced in time. And I've had it in instances before where, unfortunately, the reason we had to say no was because literally it wasn't ready. It doesn't have to be one stop all the time, but it makes life a lot easier for a music supervisor. but effectively the rights architecture and everything was just it was too busy for the time that I needed to put on it. And therefore I was like, no, stop that. We go this direction. Like this is a quicker, clear, and it'll allow us to get this across the line and done quicker, and therefore deliver on time without delay. Because the reality is, for every time you delay it and you're pushing things back a day or longer, not only affects the music supervisors and their team's reputation, but it also delays the film release potentially, and that costs a fortune. And you don't want that because that's the last thing that investors want when they've put a lot of money into a film. So, yeah, just be mindful of that. So when you do have multiple splits, make it easy in terms of making sure all the things are can be cleared quickly, and ultimately who has the approval rights within that. And maybe you decide that it's the person who's the most well read that might actually lead that. Or maybe it is split between the three of you. But if that is the case, make sure that you're all available to be contacted quickly. So maybe what you have is you've got a group which is specifically for sync. You've got your own little library that you've created together, and then it's a message in there and say, look, we've got something come through. Can you get on this, and can we have a quick email chain that you can get a response back on whether this agrees, you align with this, yes or no, effectively. Um, Again, bearing in mind, and this urgency also conflicts, like we said before, because we need the clarity and negotiation, right? Super important, really, really important. Um, but if you're again asking you those specific three questions to begin with, it'll allow you to dial down into the answer with clarity quicker, and therefore then get into the answer that you want moving forward to make sure whether it's even worth your time. So yeah, it's only when it gets super super complex and you don't have clarity where you need to slow down. Yeah,
And if you do that preparation though, just with the prior chapters that we've been talking about, and just overall mindset, that gives you that leverage, that so that when things like that come up, you're ready. And
yeah,
I'm still learning about a lot of stuff. And I mean, I composed for TV in the Philippines back in the day, but I'm still new to a lot of different things. I'm still learning. And somebody, um, yeah, like a library owner was putting out briefs, and I submitted a song to a brief, and they were like, "This song is just so perfect. We're so excited to pitch this." And it was just such good peace of mind that I had everything ready for them. Like the song, it was like that song's been done, ready to go for many, many years, and it was just peace of mind and just calm that, like, great, there's nothing to do. You let me know if there is anything to do, but we're all set. And so having that mindset ahead of time, and really kind of um, allowing ourselves to yeah, just apply it through our everyday, like I said earlier. um, that's going to help, so that when some it's less than ideal, and there is that a bit of sense of urgency, there is more peace of mind because you've built that foundation already.
yeah, exactly. And when you have multiple people on it, um, what I would recommend in um, that agreement that you have between those people, maybe you just very distinctly define what your non-negotiables are. Put it as an appendix at the back or something in a table of like, this is what I'm happy with, this is what not what I'm happy with. All right, person B, this is what I'm happy with, this is not what I'm happy with. Person C, blah 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 blah, and make it just super super clear because then the clarity makes it easy when that deal comes across the line. And again, with timing, sometimes you might not be able to wait a week for the person to reply, but at least you'll know whether it aligns with them, yes or no. And depending on the nuances of the terms, and if it's something that, ultimately you want these sync things to just go like clockwork very, very quickly, you might even put something in there where it's like, we'll give them X amount of time. But if they don't, if there's three people on this, then the majority says yes, providing it doesn't conflict with the non-negotiables. We're going to move this forward, and we're able to sign off on their behalf. We're getting into the nuances of a deal, and obviously that has to be um, checked with counsel on how you specifically drafted those agreements clauses and terms there. But the point being is there's lots of ways that you can make that happen. So the point being on a collaboration point, um, it's that way up of if you're scaling and you're wanting to get more content out quicker and it's good quality stuff, then great. Maybe it might be worth it.
Right, and again, case to case,
Yeah.
we're not lawyers or anything. This is purely for educational purposes. But I do highly recommend people get in touch with an entertainment attorney in your jurisdiction, and just be in contact with somebody who knows the legal stuff that you're dealing with. And that way, when you do have a question, you have somebody to turn to. Um, I mean, that has helped me to at least have, one or two people that I could call for some advice who are actual entertainment attorneys. But this is a really great foundation, again, for mindset. Did we have any other questions on the table? Let's see.
You had one about leverage with
Yes,
larger
please.
companies.
Yes.
Um, So leverage against larger production companies again, sync and back end. What I would say with larger companies, and I know, say for example, so if you have really, really big production that's come through and it's super high profile, you almost have a fear of negotiating against them. What I would say is I use the word against there specifically. That's the part that we need to change because it is not a battle between two parties. Again, it's not a rescue. It's not this battle. It's a relationship between the two of you that hopefully creates to a flourishing partnership that if all goes well, there'll be multiple more coming down the road. The other point being is that, the reality is, as these companies get larger, they have legal teams for this exact purpose. They're used to negotiating. Now, it's a way up between, convenience with negotiating too. Again, we mentioned about timelines too. That is a very real thing. But ultimately, they're probably more used to it than a smaller production, which is weird. You'd think you'd find more resistance in a larger company. I would argue you probably have more resistance in a smaller company because they don't understand the legalities and the nuances of the deal terms. And in fact, if anything, you get super, super drained. The reality is, with the larger production companies, they know what their non-negotiables are because they've done this a million and one times. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's a massive leverage shift, that they have all the power and you don't, because ultimately you can say no if you wish. The point being is you should hopefully be able to ask for more clarity in those deals because they've done it before and they should be able to ask the questions that you need. Spring. So I would go into it feeling super empowered in the sense of, okay, these are some serious players that I'm working with. Sure, are they going to negotiate hard? Yeah, absolutely. It's their right to, much like it's your right to negotiate as hard as you can. Ultimately, as every negotiation occurs, um, it's about getting the deal that works for both parties, and that's when the deal works. And if it doesn't, it then falls, and it won't last in future iterations later down the
Yeah, it's hard not to be intimidated
line.
by what would be considered large entities. Um, you know, big law firms, big companies, big whatever. But I can speak from personal experience. Not everybody at a big company like that is as smart as you think. And, senior partners or whatever the name you call them and all that stuff. I mean, we may be just as smart or even smarter as that. It's not really about who's better, who's smarter. Um, a lot of times we can just feel like we are just less than across the board when it comes to these big, big players. But that's just not the case. And so, having the foundation of what you're talking about in the book is great leverage to have that calm and clarity to look at things more accurately because yeah we just get blinded sometimes by the flashing lights And it is reassuring to hear that like they might, they're expecting a negotiation. And again, like I learned that from firsthand, was like, okay, well, whoa, let me try this. And like, yep, it was almost just like they were expect that I had to step up a bit and be and with confidence and all the things, but just to match that. And they were expecting that. And now you've upped your level. You've educated yourself a little bit more, and now you can it's a little bit more of an even playing field, because it's almost like we're putting ourselves at a disadvantage where maybe we could not do that by empowering ourselves with what you're talking about in the book.
Yeah, and ultimately it's two entities, or it could be more, but simply two entities coming together, um, saying, "This is what I want. This is what I don't want." Same on the other side. Does this work? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, okay, well, why does it not work, and how can we get there?
And for
Simply,
artists, I
that's all
mean,
it is.
that point with alignment though, like because it's it's hard, they're offering me a lot of money, or it's like to say no when it really just doesn't align with your values in your heart of hearts, regardless of all the other things. Like it may look like a really good deal, but if it doesn't align with you, you can always say no, because it is hard to say no if it's a bigger company or a bigger, it's like what network or what show or what, whatever it is. It could be hard to say no.
But that's only because of the inner chatter and the fact that it feels like a rescue, right? But if it wasn't a rescue and it was a relationship and it didn't align, then it's an easy no. And that's where I would encourage um, artists to kind of just reframe it. You know, if Disney or Marvel or whoever, whatever big company called you up tomorrow and wanted this, well, the reality, if it doesn't align with you, then okay, cool, they're a big company, but so what? Like, what is do you really want to do that if it takes everything away from you? Not saying that they would do that, but like, we're using the large companies as an example here. Well, don't sign the deal. And it's okay to do that. And the reason why we started with the awareness and foundation aspect in these earlier chapters is specifically for that. And you're exactly right. As you go through the deals, it then becomes easier to have that clarity because it's simple. Firstly, does it even align with me and my foundation and where I'm at? Or is this all just noise? Right? Um, it might not even be that the deal is bad. The deal from the large corporate could be really, really good. But ultimately, you might turn around and say, well, actually, this is where I'm at on my journey right now. I love the fact that you're giving me this opportunity and it could be a great relationship, but it's not where I want to be right now. So I'm going to say no, thank you. And I'm going to stick on my road that's already clearly working because I'm getting your attention. And it's one of those where um, I find it interesting, companies are growing bigger and bigger and bigger, and then a large company will come around and say, right, great, see what you're doing, love it, want to buy you. Okay, well, you could argue that okay, if it's aligned and you want to exit that period of time and the deal works, great, you want to sell that company to this large entity, cool. But clearly, you're already doing something really well that has got their attention to begin with. So maybe if you don't want to exit, ignore all of the noise and just keep doing what you're doing because it's clearly working and working very, very well. Um, and to use a different example of someone who's maybe released a track, they're getting all this media attention. We talked about it before, and all of this inflow of media requests comes through where they're like, oh, can you do this radio show? Can you do this? Blah 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 blah. Can we feature you in this article? And it's like, what happens where if we keep being reactive and then that viral loop suddenly stops? Well, we've prioritized this noise over what was clearly working and got us that to begin with. The reality is they're probably still going to talk about it, or the company's still going to want to buy you in a couple of years' time if you're stronger still, right? So, yeah, I would just kind of always go back to that initial alignment point. I think it's so important, and it's the easiest yes or no that you have, so that nothing really matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you don't need a lawyer for it. That's the
Right.
thing. Whilst we talk about a lawyer for all the deal terms and all of
Yeah.
that, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you need a lawyer necessarily for does this align with
Right.
who I am?
Right.
Only you know that better than anyone else. Now, you might need it for the nuanced terms specifically, depending on the type of discussion and whatever's going on. I don't know the specifics of it.
Mhm.
Um, but ultimately, you know yourself better than anyone, and you're always okay to say no.
Yeah. Yeah. You're always okay to say no. Um, I myself am a trauma survivor, so certain things I don't want to do, don't want to be associated with. Some people might not want to have their song played for a certain type of commercial. Like you said, maybe there's some kind of political stance or religious stance, or for whatever reason. I mean, we don't have to give a reason. Um, but there could be many, many, many reasons, and that's okay. And when you were talking about that, um, I did start to think about things and some of these bigger players, and thinking, oh well, I lost that opportunity because I had to. I didn't push. I didn't really negotiate. I didn't really, whatever. But here we are, years later. They're still around. Still, knocking on the door. And so um, it's great that you're giving artists courage to do that. And just like maybe we just need to hear it, like we just do
Mm.
need to hear that reassurance. Because I think when I could have used that at certain times when, in certain situations where it's like, you can say no to this. And I
Yeah.
know I've said many no's in my career, but it's really good to hear that. And I'll bring it back to what my therapist, working with my therapist, taught me, which is sometimes saying no to others is saying yes to ourselves. Um, and
Yeah.
so I love how you say that if you go back and know yourself enough to know what aligns, yeah, you don't need the lawyer for that. In your heart of hearts, it's knowing yourself, what you yourself believe in.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I mean, and to speak as well to the large company um point from earlier, I mentioned that in prior chapters, how I've had a deal that was um very, very favorable in terms of from a monetary aspect of things, and would have been great for the portfolio. But I said no, and it was the easiest no I've ever had, to be honest, because ultimately it didn't align with my principles or what my non-negotiables were. Um, and unfortunately, that was something that wouldn't have been negotiable, and because I raised it, and therefore that it couldn't be moved forward, and therefore I said, okay, no problem. I wish you well, um, but we won't proceed. Um, has that changed the relationship? No. They'll know who the company is. They'll work with them in the future. They can still work with me. But the difference being, we know what our non-negotiables are. So then when we do talk again, um, you know, it's a lot clearer. And we know what we will work with and what we won't. And that's a good thing. So it's, just because you say no doesn't mean you destroy a bridge either. That's the other important thing.
Right.
It's just about respect.
And at the same time, John, you can't really control other people's actions. So if you end up not working together, there's always other people to work with.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
So if nobody else has questions or anything, I'd love to find out. And thank you so much. Gretchen says, thanks very much for this fantastic information. Super useful and empowering. I totally agree, Gretchen. Thank you so much for that. Everybody watching the replay, just know that we're here through end of January on Sundays. So if you want to come join us live on Sundays at 3 p.m. Eastern. We're doing that till the end of the month. John, do you have a workbook? Sorry, a worksheet for this chapter?
Yes,
Oh, wow. Okay, great. Thank you
to
for
dive
all of
through.
that. So, artistsblueprint.com is the website, ARTISTS, blueprint, BLUEPRINT.com. Jon Altham is the name, Jon, last name Altham, Jon Altham. So please visit his website, artistsblueprint.com. Our website is musicianspeersupport.com, and email me at mps@musicianspeersupport.com if you have any questions. And so these worksheets are going to be available on your website, artistsblueprint.com, or are already available.
Yeah,
And thank you so much for this invaluable resource. Um, what do you have for us this week?
hopefully that's. Um, and also a little bit of a side note on what we discussed as well. For those that are super nervous, particularly when it comes to sales, um, find the most daunting thing on that list. That could be a company, it could be a person, whoever. Um, Phone them first. And then every single thing after that is miles easier. The reason being is because uh, when I was doing this initially, I thought, you know what, who's the largest company in the industry that I could pick up the phone to? And my challenge is, can I get to the desk of that person? I'm not going to share who that was, but it was a very big company, very, very big person in the film industry. And I was like, that's the person. And I was like, come on, let's do it. Let's just see if I can get that far. Um, I was a wreck on that. Well, before the phone call, trying to get onto that phone call. But the difference is, I got to where it needed to go. Um, and so that all the nerves are gone. So then any type of pitch, conversation, or anything on the phone that I did after the fact was a doddle in comparison because I'd already done the most daunting and terrifying thing in my view at the time, and it worked really, really well for me. So might not work for everyone, but just to think if you've got a long list of things to do, yeah, maybe pitch the most crazy and most daunting one on that list, and just let those get rid of all that anxiety out the way, and then it will make the others a lot easier to do.
Yeah, that's great advice. I've done that a couple times. It's actually worked out pretty well a couple times. So
Yeah, pretty daunting initially, and you'd be quite surprised actually that um, how far you actually get.
it made me a better person every time for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same. Yeah, it's fantastic. So this is for the chapter 5 workbook, which will be available on the website, and could be live in the next hour. Um, So yeah, this basically goes through everything in a bit of detail. I think it's about 5 or 6 pages again. Um, Having your snapshot summary towards the end. So just to blitz through this, in terms of the content, basically looking at why artists lose value at the deal stage, even when leverage does actually exist. So we start off by the negotiation reality check. So basically taking all that apply. So you negotiate without a written position, you focus on headline numbers and not the mechanics of the deal, or you struggle to say no, or you conflate the opportunity with value. Again, I've picked very, very specific things here, but as always, there's also the other block as well. If it doesn't align with you, maybe tick that and put what else is, or you may struggle with in the realities of a negotiation. Really, really important. Um, maybe you rely on industry standard language, and therefore then you might not necessarily understand it, um, or you don't model downside scenarios. What I mean by that is scenarios where it could fall apart or not go in your favor. Yeah, that's super helpful. And then going into the next bit is the negotiation readiness score. Rating each dimension, one to weak, five to strong, following the same structure as all the other workbooks. Understanding of your rights within the deal, risk awareness, the ability to walk away, and then even an own reflection on yourself in terms of, are you even ready at the end of it? Yes, I am, or no, I'm not. And if you're not, why? And how can we improve that? Is there something that we need to read? Or is it the fact that those three core questions at the start are not answered and I don't understand them? Yeah. So uh, that's the most important thing there. So your default negotiation mode, what is it? Write it without justification. I've purposely made them small blocks on purpose, whether that be one sentence or two, make it super, super succinct. Um, then moving into deal mechanics. basically ticking the components you actively analyze before agreeing. So is that the term length, the territory exclusivity, ownership, approval and veto rights, termination and exit. Um, this is really that tick box exercise to make sure that you've checked and you're aware of every single one of these and you've had a look at them. Or you've asked your attorney and they have, you know, answered your questions. You feel clear on each of those. And we got the mechanics impact, so the most misunderstood mechanic, the cost of misunderstanding it, and then the mechanic that benefits the counterparty the most. So, what is the mechanic? Well, it's the stuff that we mentioned before, which is here the deal mechanics. So, the most misunderstood could be the approval rights. Okay, well, what's the cost of misunderstanding your approval rights? That it gets synced into something that you do not align with, whether that be, as we said before, political, religious, whatever it is, that ultimately doesn't matter. It's just something that doesn't align with you. And then what's the mechanic that benefits the counterparty the most as a result of that? Well, again, have a look through those deal terms and then you'll be able to answer that specifically. So then it moves into value versus term score, looking at assessing the value of what is gained or lost, everything from leverage to your incentive alignment, and then your back-end participation and the economics of the deal. We then go into the red lines, so your non-negotiables clearly, the rights that you will not assign, the maximum acceptable term. This is really, really important as well. Your unacceptable exclusivity, the minimal audit and accountancy rights, and the exit conditions that are required. Um, i.e., if you're unprofessional, whatever that is, then I have the option to terminate the agreement within, so many days of written notice, for example, as a throwaway comment there. But yeah, maybe list them. Um, the reason being is because then when you start to do your deals, you can then use that as your reference sheet every single time. Your concessions map. So what concessions do you tend to make first? Why do you make them? And I need to update that, but there's another thing that was written there. The point being is basically that you may agree to effectively change, let's say, your term length, but um, and you'll make them in order to kind of allow that deal to get across the line. But as a result of that, your non-negotiable is that you want the reversion right. Right? Or it could be something else. I use that as a bit of an example. The point being is that's the swap and change aspect of it on the concessions map. And then you've got the negotiation outcome snapshot, the typical deal outcome for you, the leakage points, and your strongest negotiating asset and your weakest negotiating position. Your 30-day negotiation upgrade that kind of helps you improve yourself each 30 days. And then finally, as with all of the workbooks to date, is that snapshot summary at the end that aligns all of this very, very succinctly so that at the end of each workbook, you've got, what is it, 9 very specific baseline summaries for your entire career moving forward. That allows you, again, it's getting the brain used to deep diving in and then coming outwards again for strategy. So you can do that each quarter.
Really great. Yeah, I can just foresee how this is going to help just organize everything, um, and have be a really good reference point, um, for the future. And probably the approach here is to just fill out these worksheets without judgment of self, right? And just kind of let it be.
Yeah.
Um, and like, let's not be hard on ourselves with what we see as the results are, because there's no right or wrong.
Mhm.
Because, us artists, we can be pretty hard on ourselves. So yeah, once you get to the end of the worksheet, be proud of yourself that you have done that, and then
Mm.
don't judge it.
Yeah, exactly. And it will evolve as you do. It's a living document, as is the book. Um, it's never meant to be completed. It will just completely evolve as your career does and as the industry changes. So, um, yeah, we covered a lot today. It is a lot. And this is this balance, as I said before, is, taking it from what the original version of this was, which was a very business heavy kind of book, into then a field manual that is foundational and allows you to take it step by so that it's not too overwhelming to begin with, but starts to um, allow you to think differently about, music, your asset, and the career that you wish to have. Um, But the key takeaways here, just to repeat them, because they're the most important for the chapter, is that a deal is a relationship, not a rescue. Balance value, control, and time. Seek clarity before commitment, and compromise with purpose, never from pressure. The calm negotiator holds the real power, build partnerships, grow with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love that. Giving you a round of applause, John. Your voice is also very relaxing. I appreciate that as well. I'm sure you've gotten those comments before. Um, Everyone watching the replay, thank you so much for watching. Please comment below. I guess at this point you can go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Might as well do that. And I never really say that, but we're gonna say that now. EJ says, thanks, John. Thank you so much for being here, everybody in the room. Yeah, for people watching the replay, we're going to be here through the end of January, so you're more than welcome here. Join the mailing list at musicianspeersupport.com/join. You can also join the Facebook group. The invites are also there for everybody who's a member on the Facebook group. The website is artistsblueprint.com. Go buy John's book, everybody. Deborah says, thank you, John and Rachel. Happy holidays. Yes, we're
Yeah,
recording
happy
this
holidays.
December 21. I don't know. Is it winter solstice right now? December 21? I don't know. I'm not sure. Anyway, we're coming up close to winter here. Happy holidays to everybody.
Happy
Um,
holidays.
and also just thank you so much for everything. To you, John, to everyone for being here. John, any other last thoughts before we wrap up the recording?
No, just thank you for your time. Unless you have any other questions or anything, I'm happy to answer them.
I don't have any questions, but I definitely want to invite everybody to next week, just to let everybody know what we're going to be doing next week.
Oh,
Um,
sure. Yeah, happy to share that if you'd like.
yeah, let's just do, just looking at the graphic really quick. So next week is the artist operating system. How do
Mm.
we make freedom repeatable and structured? How do we make freedom repeatable and structured? So that's just something that we have to look forward to for week 6. And everybody watching the replay, the first 5 weeks are available on YouTube. It's the system behind the song, from survival to structure, the artist wealth formula, ownership and leverage, and obviously this replay, the deal blueprint, and the next one we'll be doing is the artist operating system.
And we've got another diagram, as always, ready to take us through
Yay!
that, which will be fun. And the theme, obviously, for today was clarity. How do you negotiate fairly without fear? The theme for next week and for the AOS is systems. Um, how do we take everything? And this has been it's interesting actually because it's been a theme as we come through. Like this is a lot, but how do we actually put this into practice? And how do we make this repeatable and scalable? Because ultimately that's what we're talking about in order to allow ourselves to take what is very complex into something that may be automated, maybe something that's aligned, easier to do. So you don't have to think about it and it just kind of runs itself in the background as your foundational operating system. So that's what we're going to talk about. There's lots to discuss within that, and I'm very, very excited. And it's also another project that I'm working on, which I look forward to discussing in more detail with you.
really excited to talk about that. And the best part about it for me is the freedom bit. And feeling free is it's a thing, everybody. So I definitely love that approach to it. And so, Jon, thank you so much. I'm giving you one last round of applause, everybody. Jon Altham, artistblueprint.com. Our website's musicianspeersupport.com. Jon, thank you so much.
Thank you too.
Really appreciate it. And everybody in the room, thank you so much for being here. Just a real quick mention of the people in the room: Gretchen, Deborah, and EJ. Also, yes, it's solstice today, so happy winter solstice, everyone. And we'll see you on the next one.
Yes.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye bye.